The first sound that reached me wasn't the lake or the wind brushing through the pine trees. It was laughter high, sharp, and unfamiliar. I froze on the porch, my breath visible in the cold air, the grocery bags cutting into my fingers. The wooden door stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling out onto the frosted boards. I could see silhouettes moving inside, too many of them. Music thudded against the walls, someone's voice shouting over it. My voice caught in my throat when I recognized the shirt on the woman dancing near the fireplace. My shirt! Her hair shimmered gold in the lamplight as she lifted her glass of rosé and turned toward me. Vanessa, my brother's wife. Her lips parted into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Why is this stupid Leech here? Get out!" She said the words slicing through the music like broken glass. The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward me as if I had wandered into the wrong life. I didn't speak. My fingers loosened around the bags until they thudded softly against the porch. I stepped inside, the air heavy with perfume and beer, and looked at her. Liam, my brother, stood by the window, his beer bottle frozen halfway to his lips. He didn't say a word. Vanessa tilted her head, still smirking. "You heard me. Get out!" I let my eyes move slowly across the room, the wine stains on my rug, the strangers' coats on my chair, the fireplace I built stone by stone. My pulse steadied. Then I smiled. Okay, just that. No tone, no tremor. Her smirk widened, certain she'd won. But something inside me shifted quiet and final like a lock turning in my chest. I picked up my car keys, brushed past Liam's sleeve without looking at him, and walked out. The night air bit my face clean and brutal, almost purifying. Behind me, the laughter returned muffled by walls that used to hold silence. I stood by my car, gripping the handle, staring at the reflection of the house in the lake's black mirror. For 10 years, I had bought peace with compliance, funded every apology, swallowed every insult. But in that single breath, I understood peace without respect is just silence. I started the car headlights cutting through the fog and whispered to myself, okay, the same word, but now it meant something else. It meant no more. The music faded as I drove down the winding road, my heart beating not with anger, but clarity. The lake behind me glimmered faintly cold and untouched. I didn't look back. The word she meant as dismissal had become my declaration. By the time I reached the highway, the laughter was gone. Only the hum of tires and the faint rattle of a half-empty wine bottle in the bag beside me filled the silence. Denver's skyline shimmered in the distance like something foreign, unreachable. I drove with both hands tight on the wheel, the skin of my palms pale from pressure, replaying her words in my head. Stupid Leech. I'd been called worse in whispered tones, but never out loud, never in my own house. The insult didn't sting, it clarified. For years, I'd believed that patience was love, that providing was protection. But what I'd really been doing was sponsoring my own humiliation. My name is Clara Monroe, 31, dentist, Denver. People say I have steady hands. They don't know how much control that takes. My coworkers joke that I'm the clinic's generator. I keep things running when everything else fails. I handle emergencies, fix schedules, cover shifts. When my boss's wife got sick, I absorbed his patients without complaint. The staff called me reliable, my mother called me strong, and my brother called when he needed rent money. That was the rhythm of my life. Serve, fix, give. The irony was that the only time I couldn't fix anything was inside my own family. Liam, my younger brother, had a way of making charm look like sincerity. He'd drift from job to job, always one phone call away from a disaster. When he married Vanessa 2 years ago, Mom cried at the wedding, proud her son had found someone classy. Classy was one word for her. Calculated was another. Vanessa was the kind of woman who believed luxury proved love. She never hid it either. She wore entitlement like perfume. I paid for the wedding venue after she told my mother it would break her heart to settle for less. $18,000 gone in one check, and I told myself it was family. Then came the car payments. "It's not safe," she said of her old one. "You wouldn't want your brother's wife to be unsafe, would you?" The guilt slipped in like a draft through an unsealed window. I nodded, wrote another check. Groceries, rent, holidays, each favor wrapped in guilt and presented as virtue. My parents called it generosity. They didn't see it was a leash. Sometimes after work, I'd come home and sit on the couch, scrolling through old texts, Mom asking if I could just help a little this month, Liam promising to pay me back, Vanessa sending heart emojis after every transfer. There was never a thank you, only the next request. I told myself that this was love's price, that family required sacrifice. I didn't realize how high the interest was until I looked at the sum. The lake house had been my counterweight. 3 years ago, I bought it after saving every bonus and skipping every vacation. It wasn't grand, 2 bedrooms, cedar walls, a small dock, but it was mine, every nail and shingle. The first night I stayed there, I remember the quiet, how complete it felt. I could hear the wind move across the lake, see mist rise at dawn. It smelled of wet wood and coffee grounds. I told myself, this is peace. For a while it was. Then the boundaries blurred. A towel left damp footprints on the porch, an empty wine bottle that wasn't mine. At first, I thought I was imagining things until Liam texted, "Hope you don't mind, just used the house for a night." Vanessa had posted pictures from the deck captioned, "Weekend escape with my love." My sanctuary had turned into their playground. That's what made tonight unbearable. They hadn't just trespassed, they'd declared ownership. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, feeling the ridges beneath my fingers. The same hands that built that house paid those bills held every fragile piece together. I whispered again, this time not as surrender, but as record. Okay, the first word of my new case file. Patterns don't announce themselves. They creep in, quietly disguised as love. For years, I mistook control for care manipulation for family loyalty. My mother, Helen, had a way of folding guilt into every sentence like sugar into tea. "Your brother's just finding his way," she'd say. "You've always been the strong one." She said it like praise, but it was a sentence permission for everyone else to be weak. My father, Robert, never contradicted her. His silence filled the house like fog. He'd nod when she spoke, his eyes on the television, as if neutrality could keep him safe. Vanessa fit into that dynamic like a missing puzzle piece, beautiful, strategic, and cruel in ways that never left fingerprints. Her kindness came in performances, Instagram posts captioned "family time" when she needed to look generous, polite smiles at dinners she didn't want to attend. The moment the cameras were off, the mask slipped. She'd lean back in her chair, glass in hand, voice soft but sharp. "You know, Clara, you'd be less tense if you didn't work so much. Maybe that's why you don't have anyone." She'd laugh, feigning innocence, while my mother sighed. "She's teasing, honey. Don't take it so seriously." That's how gaslighting works. It turns truth into overreaction. Every boundary I tried to set became proof that I was difficult. Every act of giving became expectation. When I hesitated to send money once, my mother whispered, "It's just temporary." "They're family," Liam would text a day later. "You're the best sis. Don't know what we'd do without you." The reward loop was perfect praise, as currency, love as leverage. But the cracks started to show. I noticed how Vanessa's compliments only came before a request, how Liam's apologies always ended with a favor, how my parents' tone softened only when I was useful. When I stopped answering right away, they escalated calls at midnight. Emotional guilt trips, the word ungrateful dropped like a verdict. The psychological violence was subtle but relentless. It wasn't fists or shouting. It was erosion. Small acts of dismissal, silence after confession, smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Each moment trimmed a piece of who I was until I felt like a guest in my own family. I began keeping notes. Dates, phrases, screenshots. At first, it was self-defense. Later, it became evidence. I labeled the folder Family Patterns. Inside were text threads, bank transfers, messages with timestamps. Each entry was a tiny fracture in the illusion I'd been maintaining. Looking back, I can pinpoint the shift the moment I stopped trying to be heard and started trying to remember. That's when fear turned into awareness. Awareness turned into anger. And anger, when contained long enough, crystallizes into resolve. Tonight wasn't spontaneous rage. It was the inevitable result of years of documentation. The insult leech wasn't new. It was just the first time someone said it out loud. It confirmed everything I'd already archived. I didn't leave that house in defeat. I left with a verdict forming quietly inside me. They thought they'd humiliated me. They didn't know they'd just given me Exhibit A. The lake house had always been more than property. It was the only space in my life untouched by negotiation. I'd bought it 3 years ago after one of those long fluorescent weeks when the clinic lights never dimmed and my mother called crying because Liam had missed rent again. I'd written the check automatically, but that night I scrolled through listings until I found a small cedar cabin on the edge of Evergreen Lake. It wasn't much, a sloping roof-cracked deck paint flaking at the corners, but it faced the water and it was mine. I signed the papers in silence, no one cheering, no champagne, just the click of the pen and the steady heartbeat in my wrist. It was the first thing I'd ever owned outright without anyone's help or permission. When I first moved in, I remember waking up to the smell of coffee and damp wood, the morning light gliding over the surface of the lake like brushed metal. It was the kind of quiet that made you realize how much noise you'd learned to live with. No demands, no calls, no guilt. Just me. That cabin was my sanctuary, my proof that I could exist without being needed. I should have known it wouldn't stay sacred. The first intrusion came small, a missing bottle of wine, muddy footprints near the dock. Then a damp towel in the bathroom, 2 toothbrushes in the cup. I asked Liam once, trying to sound casual. "Did you stop by the lake house?" He replied with a laughing emoji. "Just for a night. Hope that's okay." It wasn't. But saying no in my family was never simple. It was an act of war. So I said yes. That yes became an open door. Soon, the mail started arriving out of order lights left on sheets unwashed. The place began to smell different. Someone else's perfume, someone else's carelessness. I'd built that house with restraint, every nail placed like punctuation, but they'd turned it into a run-on sentence of entitlement. I tried to reclaim it once. Went up on a Sunday planning to clean to reset. Instead, I found cigarette ash in a bowl and Vanessa's lipstick-stained glass on the counter. She had even rearranged the furniture. That was when I realized they didn't see my house as borrowed. They saw it as theirs. And maybe deep down, I'd taught them to. That Friday in October had begun like any other, the kind of day when exhaustion becomes a second skin. The clinic was loud phones ringing, drills whining the air sharp with antiseptic and coffee. I stayed late to finish paperwork, telling myself that the weekend would make it all worth it. I bought groceries on the way out. Pasta wine, chocolate, small rituals of care for a woman who had forgotten what rest felt like. The drive to Evergreen was my reset button, 2 hours of mountain silence to peel off the week. As I turned onto the gravel road that led to the cabin, the air thinned, the trees closed in, and that familiar peace. My peace seeped back into my chest. But then I saw them. 3 cars parked haphazardly outside the gate. One of them was Liam's. The others I didn't recognize. My pulse stumbled. The porch light was on. From inside came the sound of laughter, the bass of a cheap speaker glass breaking, followed by cheers. I killed the engine and sat there for a full minute, gripping the steering wheel, telling myself I was mistaken. But then I saw her through the window. Vanessa. She was spinning in my living room, barefoot, holding a drink, my linen shirt hanging loosely off her shoulder, like some trophy she'd claimed. Her hair shimmered under the lamp. I'd chosen the one I'd hauled up those stairs myself. Around her were people I'd never seen, friends, maybe family. I didn't care. The sight felt like a trespass carved into my bones. I stepped out of the car, gravel crunching underfoot, and the October cold wrapped itself around me. My grocery bag swung from my wrist, absurdly domestic in the chaos. As I reached the door, the music grew louder. It wasn't locked. Of course it wasn't. I pushed it open, and the smell hit me, cheap perfume beer and the faint smoke of burnt food. My walls, once silent, vibrated with other people's noise. The rug was stained, my couch sagged under strangers. And there she was, center stage, glass raised. The moment she noticed me, her smile flickered, then sharpened. "Well, look who decided to show up," she said, her voice sticky with alcohol and mockery. I scanned the room, waiting for Liam to appear, to say something, anything. He was there by the window, half in shadow, eyes down. He didn't move. Vanessa's tone grew louder, playful, but edged with venom. "We have a key, remember? Thought we'd use the place for a little family getaway. You don't mind, do you?" The word family burned. I set the groceries on the counter, the clatter slicing through the chatter. "I do, actually," I said evenly. "You're all leaving tonight. This isn't a rental." For a heartbeat, silence. Then Vanessa laughed a brittle, piercing sound that fractured the air. "Are you serious? We just got here." She turned toward the others. "She always has to ruin things. God! Liam, your sister is impossible." He stared at the floor. I felt something ancient rise in me, not rage, not hurt, something cleaner. Detachment. That was when she said it. "Why is this stupid Leech here? Get out!" The word echoed, stretching, filling every corner of the room. I didn't move. The laughter died. My brother's wife, wearing my shirt, standing in my house, called me a leech. I met her eyes. She waited for a reaction, shouting tears, anything to prove she still had power. Instead, I smiled. Not bitterly, not bravely, just calmly. "Okay," I said. The quiet that followed was heavier than any scream. I turned, picked up my keys, and walked past her, past Liam, who still hadn't looked up, past the strangers who shifted uncomfortably. Every step felt deliberate, like erasing footprints one by one. Outside, the cold hit my face, grounding me. I didn't cry. I didn't even shake. I opened the car door, slid inside, and stared at the reflection of the cabin in the lake. The lights shimmered on the water, distorted false. My sanctuary was gone. But as I drove away, I realized something: they hadn't taken it from me. I'd given it to them. And tonight, I was taking it back. Back in my apartment that night, I didn't turn on the lights. The city outside my window was a smear of red and white streaks, the hum of traffic like a distant heartbeat. I placed the grocery bag on the counter, wine, pasta, chocolate, and stared at them as if they belonged to someone else. My hands were trembling, but not from shock, from clarity. I had spent years anesthetized by habit, thinking if I kept giving, the balance would shift someday. That goodness accumulated interest. But goodness doesn't pay dividends in a toxic family. It just funds their comfort. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. The glow of the screen was harsh, almost interrogative. I logged into my banking app and scrolled through transactions. Each line was a Bruise Transfers, rent car payments, utilities, all for Liam and Vanessa. I started calculating, my pulse sinking with the cursor. $56,480. I stared at the number until it blurred. Then I whispered, "Exhibit A." I created a folder on my desktop titled Family Ledger. Inside, I opened a new document and began listing every payment. I added dates, reasons, recipients. April 12th wedding venue. June 5 car payment. November 22nd Thanksgiving groceries. The list grew, a quiet indictment of my own complicity. When I finished, I scrolled to the bottom and typed the final entry, October 14th, trespass and verbal assault. It wasn't rage guiding me, it was procedure. Then came the next file, termination plan. I detailed steps: remove Liam from my emergency account, cancel autopays, revoke their access to my property. The precision steadied me. My fingers stopped shaking. I felt detached, clinical, as if I were drafting a case study, not dismantling a relationship. I poured myself a glass of wine, but didn't drink it. The smell of oak and acid filled the air, sharp and clean. I realized I didn't want comfort. I wanted consequence. When the clock hit midnight, I printed the documents and stacked them neatly beside my laptop. The pages looked official, like something ready for a courtroom. Maybe in another life I would have been a lawyer. In this one, I'd just learned how to defend myself. Before bed, I wrote one line in my journal. Tonight I stopped financing my own disrespect. I underlined it twice. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere downtown, then faded. I closed the window and let the darkness settle around me, not as a threat, but as protection. For the first time, silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The next morning, the city was still gray when I left my apartment. The air carried that early chill that made people hurry without realizing it. I didn't. I walked slowly, deliberately, my coat wrapped tight around me, the weight of my folder tucked under my arm. Inside were the papers I'd printed last night, records, receipts, and the small typed declaration I'd titled Termination Plan. I'd read it 3 times before leaving. Every sentence felt like a lock clicking shut. At the bank, the line was short. The teller smiled automatically. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" she asked. Her name tag read Andrea. I set my ID in the folder on the counter. "I'd like to remove someone from my emergency account," I said. My voice was calm, professional. She typed, eyes flicking up to me. "Of course. Who would that be?" I didn't hesitate. "Liam Monroe." The name hung between us like a door closing. She nodded, confirmed, then, with a soft click of her keyboard, said, "Done." That was it. 10 years of financial tethering undone in less than 5 minutes. I walked out into this pale light, the wind slicing through my hair, and felt taller somehow. My next stop was the leasing office for Liam's apartment building. I introduced myself, handed over a copy of the payment schedule, and requested that all future rent notices be sent directly to him. The manager glanced at me uncertain. "You're sure you want to stop coverage?" I smiled faintly. "Positive." Back home, I opened my laptop and began the digital part of my extraction. I logged into every account: utilities, auto insurance, streaming services, phone plans. Each click removed another link, another unspoken expectation. It was like pulling stitches from skin that had long since scarred over. The computer chimed softly each time I hit cancel, a rhythm both mechanical and holy. By noon, I was done. I leaned back in my chair, hands resting flat on the desk. No shaking, no guilt, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a long argument finally ends. In the afternoon, I called the locksmith. "How soon can you change the locks on a property in Evergreen?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Good," I replied. "Bring a deadbolt." When I hung up, I opened my notes again, this time creating a new document titled Accountability Log. It wasn't about revenge, it was about record-keeping. Dates, times, witnesses. If they tried to retaliate, I wanted proof of everything. Years of gaslighting had taught me that memory can be manipulated, but evidence doesn't lie. Later that evening, I walked to the small park near my building. The trees were almost bare, the sky a pale sheet of blue fading into dusk. Children were playing in the distance, their laughter sharp and innocent. I sat on a bench and watched the wind move through the branches. There was a weight in my chest, but it wasn't sadness, it was release. I thought about Liam, about how many times I'd saved him from consequences, mistaking rescue for love. My mother had always said family takes care of family, but what she meant was you take care of them. I wondered if she'd ever realize that her version of love was just fear dressed as loyalty. When I got home, I poured tea instead of wine. The steam curled upward, ghostly and slow. I opened my journal to a blank page and wrote the next line beneath last night's: "Freedom doesn't require forgiveness. It requires action." I closed the book and smiled. For years, my family had used my silence as proof of my submission. Now that same silence was becoming their notice of termination. By the third day, the storm began. It started with a call from Liam at 9:02 a.m. My phone lit up on the counter, his name glowing against the screen like an old wound reopening. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice came sharp and panicked. "Clara, what the hell happened? The rent didn't go through. The landlord said the account's closed." I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the ripples settle. It didn't go through because I stopped paying it. Silence. Then a shaky laugh, forced and confused. "You're joking, right?" I let the pause stretch until it turned brittle. "No," I said. "I'm done." He swore, the sound jagged through the phone. "You can't just cut us off like that." I said. And I did. I heard Vanessa's voice in the background, muffled but venomous. "Ask her why. Ask your precious sister what we ever did to deserve this." Liam's breath came hard, uneven. "She wants to know why. She knows why I said," and hung up. 5 minutes later, the messages started, Vanessa's number flashing again and again. Paragraphs of fury. "You're selfish. You're bitter. You think money makes you better." My personal favorite: family doesn't abandon family. I read them all, eyes dry, thumb steady. Then I typed a single line back. "You did when you told me to get out of my own house." I pressed send and blocked her. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was final. That afternoon, I turned my phone to Do Not Disturb and went for a walk. The world outside was calm, almost mocking. The streets were slick from last night's rain, and the air smelled like metal and wet leaves. I passed a couple arguing near a car, their voices sharp and circular. I wondered how many people mistake noise for connection. When I returned home, 3 new voicemails blinked on the screen. Mom, then Dad, then Mom again. I didn't listen. I wasn't ready to be scolded for reclaiming what was mine. I made dinner, cleaned the counter-folded laundry, each motion deliberate. Repetition has a way of cleansing. By evening, the quiet felt so vast I could hear my own breathing. It wasn't peace yet, but it was distance, and that was close enough. Before bed, I opened my laptop one last time. I added today's events to the accountability log, removed contact access. Call from Liam, verbal aggression. Messages from Vanessa, emotional harassment. Response documented, archived. Each word tightened the line between memory and evidence. When I closed the laptop, my reflection lingered faintly in the dark screen shoulders, straight eyes clear. For the first time in years, I didn't look tired. I looked awake. Gaslighting thrives on noise. Lies need constant sound to stay alive. But when the noise stops, truth echoes louder. I went to bed with that thought steady in my mind, like a verdict already delivered. 2 weeks passed before the next round of consequences arrived. The first came in the form of a phone call from my mother. Her voice trembled, rehearsed concern hiding the sharp edges beneath. "Honey, what's going on with your brother?" "He says you cut him off. They've been evicted." I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching the afternoon light creep across the floor. "That's correct," I said evenly. "I ended financial support. You could have warned us." She snapped, the warmth evaporating. "They showed up here last night with their things. You should have thought about your family before doing something so drastic." The word drastic almost made me laugh. It wasn't drastic to give, only to stop. "You could have warned me too," I said. "Before you handed them my house." The silence that followed was heavy measured. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. "They needed a place to go. It's temporary." I could picture the scene perfectly. Vanessa claiming the guest room, complaining about the smell of the sheets, Liam quiet as always. I said, temporary in our family means permanent. Over the next few days, the updates began uninvited but steady. My mother called under the guise of concern, but always with the same undertone guilt. "Vanessa's been a handful," she'd sigh. "She doesn't help around the house, and your father's back is acting up from moving furniture." I listened non-committal. It was strange hearing her describe the woman she'd once defended as misunderstood. Now she was running out of excuses. "You chose to open the door," I finally said. "Now you're living with what you let in." "Clara, please don't be cruel," she whispered. "I'm not," I replied. "Just honest." I hung up before she could cry. That evening, I drove to the lake house for the first time since the confrontation. The air was colder now, thin enough to sting. Frost clung to the porch rail. The locksmith was waiting in his truck engine, idling. "You the owner?" he asked. "I am." Saying it felt different now, like reclaiming a title that had been stolen. I stood by while he worked metal scraping against wood, the old locks clicking loose. He handed me the new keys, 3 of them shiny and cold. "Nobody gets in without these," he said. "Perfect." When he drove away, I lingered by the water. The lake mirrored the sky, dull silver under a fading sun. For the first time, I didn't feel anger when I looked at the cabin. Just ownership. The windows glowed faintly in the dusk, and for a moment I could almost see my old self there, tired, compliant, waiting for permission to rest. That version of me was gone. Inside, I started cleaning. Trash bags, gloves, bleach. The smell of beer and smoke clung stubbornly to the curtains. I threw them out. Every stain I wiped away felt like undoing a confession I never meant to make. I moved through each room, slowly reclaiming it inch by inch, the bathroom, the kitchen, the small guest room Vanessa had used. I found her perfume on the dresser half empty, the glass smudged with fingerprints. I carried it outside and threw it into the lake. The splash was soft but satisfying, a small punctuation mark on a long, silent sentence. By the time I finished, night had fallen. I lit the fireplace, sat in the armchair by the window, and stared at the new locks gleaming faintly on the door. I thought about how many times I'd begged for peace from people who only understood power. Now I had both. The next morning, I returned to Denver. When Mom called again, I didn't answer. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I'd already given enough. My silence was no longer their evidence of guilt, it was my proof of closure. It didn't take long for Vanessa to fight back. A week after the locks were changed, my phone buzzed with a notification from social media. I hadn't posted in months, but her name appeared anyway, tagged under a photo of a lake, my lake. The caption read, "Money makes people cruel." The comments poured in sympathy gossip half-truths. She knew exactly what she was doing. The picture showed the house blurred in the background enough to hint but not to prove. Her followers applauded her bravery. I sat at my desk reading in silence, a kind of detached curiosity replacing anger. I'd spent years reacting, now I just observed. That evening, I composed an email. It went to Janet Crow, the attorney who'd helped one of my patients handle a property dispute. The subject line, unauthorized use of private residence. In the body, I explained everything. Dates, evidence, copies of texts, screenshots of Vanessa's post. I attached photographs from the night of the confrontation and bank records showing the financial transfers I'd made. Within hours, Janet replied concise, professional, reassuring. Cease and desist letter drafted. Will send to the involved party within 48 hours. 2 days later, Vanessa's post disappeared. She replaced it with a quote about toxic people and forgiveness. I almost laughed. But then Janet called. "There's more," she said. "Your brother's wife used one of your linked accounts for her personal credit card. The bank flagged it after your access change." My fingers went cold. Fraud wasn't carelessness, it was intent. Janet's voice was calm. "I've already notified the fraud department. They'll investigate quietly. You don't need to speak to her." For the first time, justice wasn't abstract. It had paperwork, case numbers, names. That night, I walked through my apartment and noticed how still it was. No texts, no calls, no guilt pressing from every corner. I poured myself water, not wine, and stood by the window. The city below pulsed with life, people running on cycles of chaos they didn't question. I felt like I'd stepped outside of that rotation, watching it spin from a safer orbit. When my phone finally rang, it wasn't family, it was the bank's fraud investigator. "We've reviewed the records," he said. "It appears funds were used without authorization. You'll be reimbursed and we'll pursue recovery." His tone was steady, factual. Each sentence stripped away another layer of power Vanessa thought she held. After the call, I opened my journal again. The next line came easy. "Revenge doesn't require destruction, only exposure." I slept better that night than I had in months. The world outside could keep spinning. Mine was finally still. 3 weeks later, justice came with a phone call. It was a Thursday morning, the kind where the sky sat colorless over Denver and the air felt heavy enough to bend sound. I was between patients when my cell phone vibrated. The caller ID displayed a local number I didn't recognize. "Ms. Monroe," a voice said when I answered, crisp, official. "This is Detective Miles from the Financial Crimes Division. We're following up on the report your attorney filed regarding unauthorized use of your joint account." I closed my office door, pulse steady but sharp. "Yes, that's correct," I said. He continued. "We've confirmed that multiple charges on your account were made by Vanessa Monroe. Luxury goods travel and high-end purchases totaling roughly $28,000. I didn't speak. The detective's tone didn't need drama. The facts were enough. "We've contacted her employer and informed her of the investigation. She'll likely reach out to you for a statement. You're not required to respond." For the rest of the day, I worked in silence, drilling, filling small talk with patients. All mechanical. Beneath it ran a quiet hum of satisfaction, not triumph, not joy, just alignment. For years, I'd been told to keep the peace. Now the law was doing it for me. When I got home that night, I found 5 missed calls from an unknown number. Then a text appeared. "You ruined my life." No name, but I didn't need one. I deleted it without replying. 10 minutes later, another message arrived. "You'll regret this. Family doesn't take each other to court." I laughed softly, the sound surprising even me. I didn't need to. I just screenshotted, attached it to my evidence folder, and moved on. The next day, my attorney Janet called. "It's official," she said. "The bank is pressing charges for fraud. There'll be fines and possibly probation. You might get reimbursed for part of the losses." I thanked her, my tone flat, composed. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just promise you'll keep boundaries where they belong." Word spread faster than I expected. Mom called that evening, voice small, almost childlike. "Vanessa's been fired," she whispered. "They found out at her company. She's blaming you. She says you wanted to destroy her." I leaned against the counter, feeling the smooth wood beneath my palm. "I didn't destroy her," I said. "She did that herself." Clara, please, my mother pleaded. She's still your family. No, I said quietly. She was a tenant, a fraudulent one. I heard her exhale a mix of disbelief and defeat. I don't even know who you are anymore. I'm who I should have been all along, I said, and hung up. That weekend, I drove it to Evergreen again. The road curved through the trees, sunlight flickering across the windshield like old film reels. When I arrived, the lake was half frozen, the air crisp enough to burn. I stood on the dock hands in my pockets, the water reflecting fractured light. Somewhere behind me, the wind whispered through the trees, cold and indifferent. I thought about how peace had once meant avoidance, silence, compliance. Now it meant evidence, boundaries, accountability. I didn't celebrate. There were no fireworks, no champagne. Just the sound of nature reclaiming what people had tried to ruin. I sat on the edge of the dock and watched my breath drift across the lake. Justice, I realized, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it signs documents, files, reports, and moves on without applause. That night before leaving, I locked every window, checked every door, and stood for a long moment in the doorway. The house smelled clean again, wood smoke and something else. Closure. I ran my fingers over the new deadbolt, the metal cold and solid beneath my touch. No one gets in without a key. I murmured the same words the locksmith had said. Only now they sounded like a promise. The weeks that followed were quiet in the way fresh snow is quiet soft on the surface, heavy underneath. My parents stopped calling as often. When they did, the conversations were clipped careful. They had learned that guilt didn't land where it used to. But one Sunday, the phone rang again. I almost ignored it, but something in my chest told me to answer. Clara. My father's voice began hesitant, as though he wasn't sure he had the right to say my name. We need to talk. I could hear my mother's breath in the background, the sound of someone holding back tears. Liam and Vanessa. They're separated, he said. It's gotten ugly. I didn't reply. My father sighed, the weight of decades carried in that exhale. Your mother and I wanted to say, you were right, about her, about everything. His tone wasn't defensive or even remorseful. It was weary, stripped of all pretense. I thought about the years of dismissal, the way they'd told me to stay quiet, to keep peace, to understand. Hearing him say those words was like watching an old wall finally crumble. Thank you, I said softly. That means more than you think. Later that week, Liam called for the first time since the investigation. His voice was hoarse, smaller than I remembered. I wanted to say sorry, he murmured, for not standing up for you, for all of it. I closed my eyes. You don't owe me an apology, I said. You owe yourself a chance to be better. He paused. I got a new job, he added quietly. I had to learn to handle things without your help. I smiled, faintly invisible to him. I'm glad I said, that's the point. When the call ended, I stood by the window watching the city lights flicker on. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like gravity things settling where they belonged. For the first time, my name wasn't tied to someone else's failure. That weekend, I went to the lake house again. The road curved through trees just starting to bloom, the world softening back into color. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and ash. I brewed coffee the same way I had that first morning years ago. I sat by the window and watched the light spill across the water. For years, I'd mistaken endurance for love, silence for peace. But real peace, I'd learned, has edges. It requires decisions, not forgiveness. My family had lost comfort but found honesty, and I'd lost everything they took for granted except myself. When I locked the door that night, the key turned easily, the sound smooth and final.